All
I'm
right, once
ready.
again, welcome to the Kingdom Point of View. We have our guests here in the audience. We have our call on the line, and we have a special guest today on the line on the caller. She's definitely coming in, Miss Pia Simmons, Lupia Simmons. She's going to break down pretty much some mental health for us, and we're going to tie it all in according to the Word of God. But definitely, we're going to show what there's a parallel on things that have already happened and they still to come. But Miss Lupia, being a professional, she's gonna break down a lot of key components, and we're gonna play pitch and catch from there and bring you all the way home. Yes, ma'am, Miss Lupia.
Hello, everyone. I first want to say thank you so much for inviting me to be on this phenomenal show. It is truly an honor. I will say that as a Christian, I say first that I think it's very important that we talk more about mental health, especially not only in the Black community, but all communities. But when we think about African Americans and mental health, typically we always in the past have went to the church for guidance. Now, I'll be the first to say that having a relationship with God is key. It's very important when we think about our lives. But when we talk about mental health, sometimes we do not get all the information that we need from our church. And so I want to just bring up some things today that can really help us as we navigate this thing, because I believe that it is essential to not only have your mental health intact, but it goes hand in hand with our spiritual life. To be spiritually healthy for me is a goal every day. And as a therapist, I can't impose my beliefs on individuals, but if they ask me, then I definitely can talk to them about my walk with Christ. And so, what I would say to those of you that are watching is number one, it is not a death sentence if you have a diagnosis. Having a mental health diagnosis is no different than having high blood pressure. It's no different than having heart disease. But what's important is that you take the time to pay attention. And I'll just give you an example. Years ago, we all had that cousin Bud, a cousin Tommy that stayed in the back room, and he stayed in that room because we weren't able to handle him. We didn't know what was going on. Flash forward, now we understand that maybe he was suffering from bipolar disorder, or maybe he had schizophrenia. And so what is essential is one, don't be ashamed if you see that you have a family member or child that is going through something, seek help. And so you may ask, where do I do that? Well, if you have someone, like for example, at my church, a lot of times if someone is dealing with something, they come to me and ask questions, and they share with me about what's going on, and then I'm able to direct them to the proper services for them to get care. But what if you don't go to church? Then maybe your child is in school, you can talk to the teacher. You may have someone on your job, or their pediatrician can give you directions. If it's an adult, your primary care can give you some directives. And so let's say, for example, you have an individual that's dealing with suicide. Right now, if you've been paying attention, to the news, we are in a crisis when it comes to that. But what does that stem from? When we look at African Americans, a lot of times in our homes, you all have heard what happens in this house stays in this house. But what happens when you have someone that's dealing with molestation, or if they're in a home where they're being physically, mentally, physically abused? You know, yes, you want to have privacy and deal with things in your home, but if you're dealing with that type of trauma, then it is essential that we get those individuals the help they need. And so, how you would do that, for example, if a young person came to me and they said that I'm being sexually abused at home, as I have to make a response. It's my job as a therapist to give that information to the authorities. And so we would do that. We would make sure that we get them the proper help that they need, whether that is physical exam, at the hospital, seeing a therapist, seeing a psychiatrist, etc., to make sure that they're getting the treatment they need. What if an individual is saying they're being physically abused at home? Then we're going to talk about that and talk about the different components, and also bring in the parent to talk about parenting. There are classes that you can take to get you assistance with that. But what happens is when we tell a child, no, they didn't touch you, or you're making it up, that individual begins to internalize all of the things that they know to be true, but yet you don't believe them. And so eventually they start to have depressive symptoms. Unfortunately, those depressive symptoms can turn into suicidal ideation, which is suicidal homicidal ideation. And then they get to the point where they may start cutting themselves or harming themselves in other ways. We don't want that for our children. So I'll be the first to say that if there's a problem, speak out. It shouldn't be about what are people going to think about me. It should be about how am I going to help this individual heal and get to the next level. And when I think about mental health, we can't just keep going around and saying that there's nothing wrong with a person. So I would encourage you guys. I don't want to get too deep today, and I know I'll come back on at a later time. But if you are suffering from mental illness, if you have depression, if you have body image, issues, if you're even struggling with your academics, dyslexia, if you have ADHD, any of those things, there's an app for that. You can go to your local mental health center and you can get assistance. Here in Alabama, I live in Alabama, and I have my associate's license in counseling. And one of my favorite resources that I link individuals with is 211. When you call 211, you can say, hey, I'm dealing with, suicidal thoughts, I'm dealing with homicidal thoughts, or I need help with food. Can you imagine what it's like for an individual when they can't afford to take care of their family? That could drive anyone into a depressive state. And so, what we want to do once we get that diagnosis, one of the idea, what is it? Um, and let me say this sidebar: there's some things that are biological. So when we look at Down syndrome, when we look at schizophrenia, let me take it to this level. When we look at Alzheimer's, you know, those things can follow in our lineage. So we want to be very mindful of our family history and what is going on, and we want to get help. Autism, that is something that people shy away from getting diagnosed. My question is why? There's no reason to not get your child the help they need because right now, if the earlier you're diagnosed, the sooner that you can get the help that you need. And so once you get that diagnosis and you have that evaluation, then we go to the next step, which is treatment. And so treatment can look different for all of us. Typically, when someone comes in and see me, I am going to assess them, and then I see them to see the psychiatrist. I do what's called a clinical impression, but the psychiatrist is going to give them their actual diagnosis. Then I will develop a treatment plan with that individual. It's person centered. What goals do you want to work on? And these things are in alignment with what their diagnosis is. So if I have a child that's dealing with ADHD, I may work with them on ways in which to improve their grades in school. Okay. And so, we will set up a regimen for that individual to come in with treatment. It could be twice a week, it could be, once a week. It just depends on that individual's need. And so, I am a firm believer. A lot of people would say they don't like taking medication. I don't either. But if it's going to help reduce my symptoms and help me have quality of life, then I'm definitely going to take it. So then the other thing is we want to make sure that you're on a proper medication regimen. And I would tell anyone it's no different than if you have high blood pressure, because that's something we can relate on, right? If you're taking your pill and you notice that your headaches continue, what you're going to do? You're going to go back to your doctor and say, hey, this is not working for me. Well, I want to encourage everyone to be vocal about that with your therapist and your psychiatrist because then and only then can we make changes. And there's more than one ways that you can take the medication. You can take it by pill, and you can also get a shot. So, you want to do what's best for you. And then there's the holistic approach. There are individuals who do meditation. I think meditation is great. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're doing the things that are going to help you get to the next level. And before I end, I would say this too. When we think about the correlation between our mental health and our spiritual mind, I think about the fruits of the spirit. And so that's joy, that's peace, kindness, forbearance, gentleness, self control. Those things are essential to having a quality life. So imagine if your mental health is out of whack and you don't have people that love and care about you, you don't have that support, you don't have peace, you're not able to put a smile on your face and feel it from the inside. Those things are going to make life tough for you. So topple that, add that on to suffering with mental illness. And so I don't believe that God wants us to live a life that's in chaos, because that's not how God works. With God, everything is in order. And so I would tell you as a professional, when my life is out of whack, when I feel like there's something a little off, I stop, I pray and I say, God, I need to be centered. And I go into prayer. That's what I do. And so I would encourage anyone, because for me, I choose happiness. I choose joy every day. Does that mean that I may not get stopped at the light and I'm 5 minutes late for work? It happens. But I can either have a positive attitude about it, or I can be angry and distraught. So at the end of the day, I believe that God wants us to live a life full of happiness, not to negate the fact that there's going to be some sad things. So some keys to having that is having a good support system. I'll be the first to say that sometimes our families are not supportive. And so that's when you find people who are like minded, who want to see you win. Those individuals are not going to take from you. If you're doing well, they're going to root for you, not make you feel less than because they're not, winning at the same level. And if you know anything about God, uh, faith ain't all, our faithfulness and the good things that come to us, favor, it's not always fair. It's not going to look the same for me and you, but that does not mean that it's not coming to you. So, I just want to encourage everyone, when we talk about your mental health, it is essential to seek treatment. When we don't seek treatment when it comes to our medical, we find ourselves in situations where we have conditions that they may say this is your final stage. Don't let that be you. Do what you need to do today to get that help. And you have people that are here to help you and not judge. That's a pet peeve of mine. If I see someone, picking on someone because of their diagnosis, because it could be you. Some of the children and adults that I've worked with in the hospital setting, their first onset of their schizophrenia, their first psychotic break was when they smoked marijuana. That marijuana happened to be laced with something. So we also have to talk about our drug addictions, and what kind of people are we hanging around? What are they subjecting us to? And what are we partaking in? So we all have a responsibility when it comes to our mental health. And so I just want to encourage everyone that's listening today and that will listen in the future. You have the power to live your best life. Make sure that when it comes to your mental health, that you're keeping that and your spiritual health at the top. Because even if you are have everything going well for you, it only takes one thing to bring you down. So I just want to encourage everybody. Life is what you make it, and the goal is to have your mental health intact. Do not be afraid to go to the doctor. Don't be afraid. And don't be afraid to seek a therapist. There are therapists of all races, there are psychiatrists of all races. And I will tell you that, when they say life is like a box of chocolates, that's how the therapy world is. Find the chocolate that you like. Find somebody that you resonate with, and know that there's so many different techniques that we utilize. I love CBT, but I also love reality therapy, but you got to know how to use that with certain clients, because not everybody is going to take things the same way. So if you want a therapist that's going to be real with you, let them know that up front. If you're unhappy with your therapist or make you feel uncomfortable, let them know that. And also keep in mind too that we're mandated reporters. So if there's something going on, we have to report it, or we're at risk of losing our license. And at the end of the day, our goal is to do no harm. That's what it says in ethics, do no harm. If I am not providing you with quality care, then it's my job to refer you to someone that can assist you with that. And lastly, as a therapist, it's not my job to fix you. That's not what my job is. My job is to provide you with a set of tools that, if you choose to use them, can help you improve your life and live a life that God wants you to live. And so, again, I just want to tell everyone to be encouraged, and I am here for any questions, comments, or concerns.
All right, Miss Pill. Miss Pill, you done laid it down for us in here. I mean, you walked a lot of principles. Once again, on the kingdom point of view, I would definitely say that I'm a very good listener. And we got some people in the audience and just as well, and they may have some comments, but I got to break down them principles on what you said. And it's good that you broke it down from your professional circumstances, because you did mention that due to regulations that you are governed on how you introduce your own personal belief systems, and that becomes a stronghold too, especially on a believer who already understands that there is an answer that is coinciding with their mental health. So I can imagine for you and many others are in many professions that are governed by that just as well. I know that we have certain regulations here, where we're living at for us United States, that try to create some type of fair medium that says, land of the free, the home of the brave, so to speak, and a freedom of speech on one hand and maybe not on another. But at the same time, thank God that you came on the kingdom point of view, because whatever you professionally can't say, I professionally can. So therefore, I will tell them that they do need to seek God just as well as what you're saying from the mental standpoint, and to throw the scriptures in there on what you said. You talked about, I always like to work backwards, to get to the results, because you talked about bad company that people can be around, their environment, their influence. That's what they call the influence in the world. It tells us to do not conform to this world, but be ye transformed. So we're talking about a mindset. Jesus said to repent, which means to change the way you think. So that is all involved in the mental health standpoint. You also talked about what I was saying with the association, so I want to make sure that we understand that bad company corrupts good behavior. Those things are already prevalent in every day-to-day life. So we also dealing with the situation that you mentioned, working backwards, about that could be family situation, that could be a situation of something that's personal. Now we're dealing with it in the form of things that is called verbal and mental or emotional abuse. These things can be done, like you said, directly or indirectly, or they may say professionally, overt or covert. So these things happen where people are actually trying to utilize a system that is called, this term, indoctrination. So it's a repeated of things that psychologically affects people. Like I said, it could be overtly, which could be more direct, or be covertly and indirect, but still with the same intent. And so there's a lot of battles that you stated from dealing from a professional standpoint, and it's also tied to the spiritual, because that's the key to everything. If you are utilizing that the spiritual is on the back end of the earthly, then you always gonna be working behind the clock, because God created man in his own image and likeness. So God is a spirit. So he made us a spirit and put us in a dirt body. So these dysfunctions do take place because first, their spiritual side is already down, and then you can actually be coming into a situation, like you said, in family, to where your surroundings, maybe no one actually believes, or no one actually has an answer professionally. And then you also stated about the lack of the consistency in medication, of the person being ashamed, not, wanting to target their own symptoms that they're paying attention to, or maybe others. Because we're also dealing with circumstances of suicide and things of that nature. Some people are already psychologically born in uninhabitable type environments, and then now they see other things, and now they feel less psychologically, just because what the words say, don't covet your neighbor things. See, because they're already paying attention to other things that's not theirs. And that was a point also that you made, that this can actually be just as well some form of controversy in a circumstance. And so there's so many psychological things that people need to understand that does affect people directly and indirectly. Even like we said, environment, you talk about family members, we're talking about how you grow up. And then you mentioned the point even dealing in education. Right now, we also have a situation with LeBron James, who actually took his own step in Akron trying to create the school, which he did. He didn't ask for the best group of kids. He got the worst of the kids. Say, give me whomever. And now that none of them at this time didn't pass the test, I want to say whatever grade at this time was the 8th graders, didn't pass the test, now they willing to give a backlash and try to make it seem like, you know, like, now what about these kids now? But the reality is, based on what you said mentally and what we also know spiritually, some people are already put at a disadvantage to fail, and then someone like me, you, and others, they still scratching their head like, well, how did these people become who they are? Because we put them in the same system, but yet they came out of the system. And so the goal a lot of times when we want to say the oppressor, or as the word would call it, the adversary, you know, the devil or the evil spirit, or, you know, the prince of the air, you know, whichever name they want to utilize, that this person is always trying to take the good people and those who are trying to believe and those who are already believing by doing spiritual attacks on them in many different ways. So to state that point, like you said, to be encouraged, and you want to say this to many people who watching just as well as I on the kingdom point of view, and utilizing anyone who's taking the step out there that's taking that type of desire to want to help others. Don't be discouraged just because it seems like it's not working. You have to be consistent. Even on your medication, like you said, if they tell you start taking it at 12 o'clock and they tell you need to take it at this time, the consistency of taking it at that time, what they do not understand psychologically is that the body will conform to the mind. And if the mind, if you're doing it incomplete or inconsistent, then it's going to throw the body off on how it should respond to its own healing process. The same thing that happens according to the Word of God. I mentioned it on many shows in different sessions about, you know, I use one example where we want a whole plate, but we're half a plate. You know, we actually want the whole results, but we only giving half the time. You know, we want to ask God for all this favor, as you mentioned, and you say that favor ain't fair because God will and purpose is his choice, you know, not mankind's choice. And so we do have these desires, like you say, we may want these things, but we still got to understand that God's desire, will, and purpose gonna override ours. We just have to also pray, like you said, when you're feeling empty at certain times, that we got to know who our source is. See, if you never know who your source is, then you'll find yourself doing all these other things, like you said, which is called, when we're dealing with adversities in the Bible, you know, they are distractions. The words say that narrow is the way, you know, so it'll let you know which direction you need to go in. Jesus himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one get to the Father but through me. So the direction and the destination have already been given, but once again, we're dealing also in the world of people professionally, and some people, because, you know, just like in church or many other places, see, that's where he's going to show up at. See, he know that people need their help. He know that people, whatever they need to actually sustain, to develop a better mindset, you know, in order to grow, that's what he's going to attack. And so we need consistent good people who are believers to be able to still be in those positions, because that's what God charged us to do. He said, go into the world. And I've said it on many sessions that world means systems of influence. World does not mean earth. And so that's a very key component when people are starting to read and study, so that they don't get sidebarred by these conversations that take place, because that's what happened. They want us well, actually what happened, there's a displacement of words, and so that we begin to value all the things that they tell us that are negative, not the things that are positive, because they want us to focus on these type of things. And so now that attacks your mental health, because the mental health deals psychologically. That's why when God, if they do want to understand what they say, well, we know man won't know all things. That's what the Bible teaches us. But if you want to have a very good idea what God's idea is, then you want to follow exactly what Jesus said. That's why his first public statement, not when he was in the temple when he was 12 years old praying and his parents had forgotten he was there, when he made that public statement after John baptized him in the river of Jordan, that he said the same thing John was teaching: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, or near, or whatever translation they want to believe, because we got the hammer in the word of God, understanding the kingdom principle, that the assignment of God was based upon what was Jesus trying to do. He was trying to get us to change the way we think, which coincides with the mental part, because if your mind never changes, nothing never changes. And we break down Jesus and understand that in other translators, they said logos, which is the idea of God, which is the idea expressed. So only thing that we are only after in order to increase and become who we need to be is changing our ideas. If your ideas never change, then your belief never change. And we're dealing with the precepts, like I've said in many other sessions, because your precepts are important. If you come into any profession with a bad idea, it doesn't matter what you put over, it's still the same thing. That's why we have corrupt people in high positions or in other positions, because they were corrupt when they got in there. I learned this from Miles Monroe and many other things on studies. He said if you're a bad egg and you mix with a good egg, but yet you want an omelet, the omelet always gonna come out bad. It's never gonna be right. Because see, whoever you are coming into a circumstance or situation is gonna be actually the end result of the circumstance. That's why God is in eternity, we in time, because God never started nothing that he hadn't already finished. That's how it's easy for the word to teach us that he knew us before we was in our mother womb. How can God know he before we was in our mother womb? Because he already know exactly. He said he already know the plans that he got for you. You know, he worked on many of them in the Bible. A lot of times where he was trying to tell them, hey, I need you to do this. Moses go do that. Joshua go this. Knock Saul off his horse on the road to Damascus. Jacob and Esau was supposed to be given the birthright, but Jacob understood, even though he was trifling, him and his mother. If they don't believe that, read a little bit more. His mother was involved too, but Jacob still understood the birthright. Esau took it for granted. So God turned around and used Jacob and said, now I changed your name to Israel. And so out of that come the 12 tribes. Huh? That's how the line of Judah come into play. So many variables that still with a thought process. See, Jacob had a thought. Moses came to a thought. Abraham came to a thought of faith. David came to a thought. If your ideas are never changed, then we all technically are struggling with mental health, Miss Simmons. You know, they just may not be taking medication, but they still bamming their head on some type of depression or something that's been let down in their life that they haven't even been diagnosed themselves. Because probably in the medical field, you know, they don't really know how to diagnose that because they don't want to intertwine certain belief systems, and then they don't want to get caught in this riffraff because they want to appease to everybody. But one thing when it comes to dealing with God on the kingdom point of view, I said over and over again, God is the king. There is no negotiation. There's only one way to do it, and that's changing our minds and then going to the clinical part, like you say, professionally, and adding that into the standpoint. For those, as you said, we do have to be very mindful and pay attention to the early warning signs. There are some things that are happening, and like you said, the earlier that we catch these things, the better we'll be too. Because just because you have to take high blood pressure medicine doesn't mean that you have a problem, because some things are hereditary. You know, these things are going just the way. We all are not built the same. We all have different complexions. And then what we have to understand, if you mix, let's just say a H with a Z, now you got an H and a Z. So whatever that means, meaning that whatever conditions this person had and that person, now they have a child, it's very likely the child could get one or the other or both. So these things are passed on through generations that people have to recognize just as well, you know, from high blood pressure, sugar, you know, everything is happening. So just because you're treating something doesn't make you less than. That's what I heard you saying just as well, that ties into a person mentally what we call self-worth. Because self-worth is lacking, there's so many dominoes effect that are psychologically done. And so this system, what I would call a system of control, wants to make sure that we mentally never arrive to a point to where we're able to begin to sustain a certain way so we can recognize these clear points. But I also want to give my audience a chance, because I'm about to ram up. You done gave so many things that's in my head, and don't run. I got about 3 hours worth. But if anyone in the audience over here want to say anything.
Ms. Simmons, I just wanted to ask you, when they are deprived financially, how can they get in to see the mental health counselor?
Okay, that's a great question.
Steps or privileges that you all offer the people that do not have the financial money to get mental health therapy?
Yes, that's a really good question. And that's the reason why a lot of people don't seek it, because they think that, hey, if I don't have the money, no one's going to see me. So here in Alabama, and I'm sure they do this in Georgia, there's a remedy. But in Alabama, they have sliding fee scale. So say for example, for our individuals who may be on disability or unemployed, what you would do is they'll have a list of documents that you would bring in, and then they will review it to see if you meet the criteria. And that criteria is going to be different. I'm sure it's going to be different here in Alabama than it is in Georgia. But for example, they give you a certain tax bracket that you'll have to be in, and they want to know, how many people are in your home and things of that nature. And then from there, they'll let you know how much you will have to pay. And some individuals don't have to pay anything. Another resource that I think is really good. So here, people can go to churches. A lot of our local churches will assist you with paying for that. And we have a lot of nonprofit organizations that will assist you with paying for your mental health. And then another thing that people can look at, if you get Medicaid, if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield, if you have any type of insurance, then you want to call your insurer and ask them what you have. Like, for example, even PHIP, teachers insurance, those individuals have a certain amount of sessions that they can get per month. So for individuals that don't have coverage, that would be my recommendation. You want to see what you have locally. Like I said, here in Alabama, we can call 211. And, you know, I believe you can even dial that number in Georgia and give them your zip code. And once you give them your zip code, then they can let you know what resources are available in your area. So that's what I would tell individuals. And then the next thing, I know people probably gonna get me for saying this, but reach out to your family members. A lot of times, I know all of us, have different struggles at different times. But when someone really is wanting to invest in you, they may be willing to help you with your mental health. Now, here's the thing, that individual has to be ready, because we don't want to, take advantage of our resources. And so family members may be able to help you. So I would say, number one, go to your local mental health center, and ask them if they have a sliding fee scale, and or let them know, I'm unemployed right now. Are there any resources for me? The next thing, you want to look at your churches and see what type of resources they have, because a lot of them help people with their rent and food and things of that nature. They may also have a resource for that. And sometimes we actually have therapists at our church. And if you don't have a therapist at your church, I'm not saying don't talk to your pastors, your evangelists, because they can definitely still be a source of guidance. At my church, I assist, with individuals who may be dealing with mental health guidance, but we also have a speech therapist at my church. So utilize your resources, and go from there. So that's what I would say for individuals that don't have money. Utilize your community resources, and again, don't feel ashamed to ask for help. They say a closed mouth
Absolutely.
does not get fed, so ask for help.
That's right. Absolutely, Miss Pierre.
I hope
Okay,
I
Ms.
answered
Simmons,
your
I have
question.
another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh, how can we, as a black people, get the information out in the community about mental health? How we can seek help by way of mental health? I know
Okay.
we have the church, but it's very few churches will let you get up and talk about mental health. So how can we get the information to the people?
So, I'm gonna have to shout out. I hate I missed your event, but when you do community events, I'm pretty sure you guys have had a lot. I don't know if the kids have started going back to school, but when you do your community events, that's an awesome time, because you have the individual's ear. They're there for the fun, the slide, riding the rides and the free food. But that's an ample time where they're sitting and eating to talk to them about mental health. If you attend a church, and this is, let's do a roll call. When I lived in Georgia, I was a member of GUION. Anything that I needed when Pastor Watson was there, I was able to get as a member of that church and a part of the community. And so what I would say is if you're in a church that does not provide that type of service, the number one thing to do is to speak out about it in a respectful way and just let your pastor know, pastor, this is something that we really need. One thing that my church does is, while I am a therapist, I'm not the only person that God gifted. So we have people come in from time to time to talk to us because we lost our first lady last year. And so we have people come in and talk about grief counseling. So I would say in our community, number one is anytime there's a community event, add a mental health component to that. In schools, I know that it's not something that they talk about all the time unless they're in a special education, cohort. But I would also say that that might be something to bring up to our teachers that we want to have that conversation. If your child is in preschool, or what do we go, Head Start, then that's something, because you're not going to tell me that we don't have babies dealing with ADHD, because I see it every day. We don't have kids that aren't on a ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So we know it's there, but like you said, what do we do? Um, if you have an event at your house, talk about it, because there's always someone that thinks that they're alone and that they don't have any resources. Another thing that we can do to get it out to our community is our doctors. I urge our African American doctors, our doctors of color, to talk to your patients about their mental health and link them with resources. I have an amazing physician, and while she's not African American, when I had my son, a lot of times some people can go through what they call postpartum depression, and so there's many levels of that. But I had a physician about me that she said, Lupia, if this is something that you're in need of, here are some resources. So I would say in your community, get your heavy hitters together. And I'm not saying it's not about individuals that make a lot of money in your community. It's the people that when they speak, people listen. Get them to start throwing more events, in the community. And that's going to be the number one way that we can get it out. Another thing that we can do is our local news stations. Talk to them about having segments about mental health to help people become more aware. And finally, organizations. I'm not, in a Greek organization, but I'm pretty sure that we have, the Divine Nine, a lot of people in those organizations who are well aware of, mental health and can provide, directives. Um, Eastern Stores, the Masons,
Hmm.
those organizations can put on events in the community. So I think it's going to be a networking thing. I think that's how we help our community, is by networking and getting people out to talk about it. And I want to say this too, because I didn't say it before. We cannot forget our elderly. They suffer from mental health too. And a lot of times, because we don't understand, we don't know what it is, we just write it off as if, they have issues, they have problems. No, it's bigger than that. So we want to make sure that we are getting them the help they need. Here in Alabama, we have state hospitals, and a lot of times those individuals, they can only go there if they're age 65 and up. So that's a population that's not recognized, in my opinion, because people are living longer. So imagine if you have a family member that's in their 70s and 80s and they're suffering from mental illness and they have no help. A lot of times those people, those individuals end up in one of our state hospitals. So we have to, come back. It takes a village. And so I would say, it's going to take a village to get the word out. And you use everything that you have in your arsenal to notify the people. I know we do flyers. I know that, we're doing podcasts and things of that nature. But I think that we start with what do you have and you build from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. We got another audience member want to say something. Yes, sir, young man.
Okay, how you doing, Miss Simmons?
I'm good.
My question, or I want to know, is what can we do to help our young people as far as with this, mental health, family crisis? The families are not together. How can we reach out to them even though they don't want to be, they don't want help? But what do you think we should do, or how can we come about it without um, tearing the family more apart? I guess.
Okay, that's a great question. And I have a so I'll say this. The number one thing that a child needs is support. That's the number one thing they need. And they need a listening ear. Not a listening ear that's waiting to respond, but a person that's gonna, it's called active listening. Hear what they're really saying. I tell my clients all the time, when you come in here, all hats off. Whatever you need to talk to me about, however it needs to come out for you to get your point across. Of course, we wanted to be respectful, but sometimes, you know, things that people say come out in different ways. But I always tell them, I want you to be open and honest with me, and you got to listen. We cannot dismiss kids when they come in to us. And so when we talk about our family dynamics, we have a lot of single parent homes. We have some fathers that are raising their children, and then we have some mothers that are raising their children alone. And so what I think is, what I know is essential is to have a good support system, to have people around you that want to support you and encourage you. Sometimes we fall into the pits of the wrong people. And those are individuals that will have our children being promiscuous, using drugs, and things of that nature. So, what I would say is, number one, communication. Have an open door policy for their kids to come in and talk to you. I am not, I'm not naive to the fact that sometimes parents don't know how to deal with things because the issues that they have not resolved are still there. And so if they didn't get that help as a child, how are they going to help their own baby? So be strong enough to know, one, that the God that we have, the Bible, is there. It's there for us if we choose to use that tool. But when we're living here on earth, we have to be mindful that there are so many things coming at us that can keep us from achieving our goal. And so for young people, they need to know that reassurance that they have their support. And that's not a financial thing. That's showing up. Go to their games, be there for the different events that they're doing. If it's a spelling bee, whatever it is, cheerleading, whatever it is. If they're a great writer, highlighting the good things about them. And having that opportunity to kind of have dialogue with them about what they need. What is it that can make them happy? And being realistic. If you're in a position and you have a child that wants a certain pair of shoes and you know that you don't have the finances for it, I say have that conversation with your child. Mommy and mom and daddy are not in a position where we can get this for you, but you know what? We want to be good stewards over what we have, what God has blessed us with. And if we can be a good steward over this, then a door will open where we'll be able to he'll bless us with more. And we'll be at a place one day where we'll be able to get this for you. But what's most important thing that we have is love. And that there is a component that a lot of kids don't have. Most of the children that I have worked with come from single parent homes. But then I don't think you're ready for this one. Our biracial children, they're dealing with identity crisis. They don't know who they are. So again, having role models for kids. I
All right.
mean, when I say role models, I'm not talking about Lizzo and Beyonce. Not saying that, that there's not an audience for them. I'm talking about people that's going to capture them here and here with
Correct.
positivity and encouragement and guide them. Give them those tools that they need to be successful. Here's an example. If you have a young man that is playing sports, he's really great at it, but maybe his family doesn't have the finances. We figure out how we're going to help him. Because maybe him coming to those games, him practicing every week with his coach, is what keeps him off the streets, is what keeps him from being another statistic. Or you have a young lady that's really smart, but when she gets home, she has to watch her brothers and sisters because her mother is at work. How do we help that child? We look at what resources are in the community. We ask her what is it, what are your goals? And then we try to be that positive light to help her achieve those goals. If it's by scholarship, if it's by offering her an internship or an apprenticeship to help get her an outlet, a positive outlet. So long story short, making sure we provide them with a listening ear, noting down what are their needs, because we have needs and wants. Those things are two different. Those are very different. But write down their needs. Try our best to make sure that those needs are met, and being honest with our kids about the society that we live in. Transparency can go a long way. I think that, like for example, I have a 2 year old. And so I may say to my son, you know, you can't have that right now, but we may be able to get it for your birthday. At 2 years old, he's excited because he's like, birthday. But if you tell a 10 year old that they can't have something and they've grown up in a family where they've never, had the luxuries, it's going to be a very different response. And so I have always focused on the positive. The negatives are important. I think they need to be identified, but focus on what that person is good at. What can I bring some joy out of in that individual? So I have seen that here in Alabama, there was an officer that was killed, and the first day of school, his colleagues were there to fill in the gap. So this boils down to filling in the gap when kids don't have that support. And that's going to look different for everybody. Filling in the gap means um, that you may not have a father figure, and I might not be your biological dad, but I'm gonna short with you, and I'm gonna provide you with some principles about what a dad would say to you to encourage you as you grow up, whether it's a young man or a young woman. You know, share principles, encourage them. Someone saw me when I was a kid, and they poured into me. I'm not going to say that I wouldn't have been successful if not for that person, but that changed the trajectory of my life because someone saw me. And I've always been very small, always knew what I wanted, but circumstances, if your parents are going through a divorce, that can shift things in a child. If you lost a parent, that can shift some things in a child. So while it's not our job to be a replacement, I believe it is our job as a community to come and fill in the gap. And my mom told me when I was a kid that God is a father to the fatherless and a mother to the motherless. And she said, wherever you go, there are going to be people to fill in the gap. And I have lived in about 4 different states, and everywhere that I have been, someone has filled in the gap. So while my mother is physically in North Carolina, I have a mother in Georgia, a person in Georgia that loves me like a mom. I have a person here in Alabama, several people here in Alabama that loves me like a mom. And that is what helps keep me grounded. So I hope I've answered your question. I know I got a little long-winded, but basically just being there and listening. And if you can provide the resources to them, do that. And if you can't provide the resources, then look and see what's in your community that can assist those children in being successful.
Yes, ma'am. You did a great job, Ms. Pierce. Ms. Simmons, you definitely answered that question to my satisfaction, and hopefully for the young men and everyone else in the audience. Because working backwards again, like I say, you talked about actually being that influence, and you may mention that the Father, filling in the gap, which is God. So that's why I say He's our Father. So when there are missing, parents at a time, that in this belief that you can fill in the gaps because He's all that and then some. He's the substance that we're looking for. And like we say, we'll hear the phrase where He's the way maker. He's always on time. And these things are true because God is God all by Himself. And so with those type of resources, with the young man, what he said, it actually ties into these statements that I would make that will probably walk more on another session because we're dealing with the mental health, but it's actually dealing with a functional family and a dysfunctional family. And so because of those types of things, there are a lot of components that intertwine, like you say, that can take place that brings on a certain letdown in a child based on what they've seen unconsciously and doesn't even know that they are actually affected by it, because it talks about different stages in children's lives. On the book, one of the books I read is called Codependence by Johona, and it talks about the baby stages, the adolescence, pre-adolescence types of stages that psychologically deals with people based upon their upbringing and circumstances and how they become adults who actually behave similar to exactly what they've experienced. And these things are passed on from one generation to the next, consciously and unconsciously, because anger travels. That some people actually start displaying their anger at an older age from something that happened when they was younger. And that's how in school they say that bullies a lot of times psychologically are being either mistreated at home or bullied themselves. So they come to school and want to do the same behavior to others. When it comes to people who have been physically molested, and now they become, pedophiles and molesters as well, because they're still psychologically damaged from things that have been done to them, that no one actually intervened on their case, like you said, from their standpoint, so they feel like they need to repeat the same behavior. And that's part of that terminology that we used earlier about that type of indoctrination that happens, unfortunately, in a lot of systems that we have, even in the prison systems and things. This is exactly what's taking place. Unfortunately, they are generating this type of mentality out here from the lack of resources, whether it's, I used the LeBron James situation earlier, him stepping in, trying to provide and trying to actually come into a play like, okay, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, but those things are all designed to try to discourage us just as well. But, we still have to put our best foot forward, even for those who are unfortunate at that time, because Rome wasn't built in a day, so.
Right.
And because of that, the consistency of things actually bring upon results just as well. And I've used this example many times that people would know that even going to the gym and exercising, we want results, but we have to be consistent. And so don't get let down on the first day that you didn't achieve your goal. But I promise you, if you keep at it doing the right thing for the right reasons, then we know that God gonna work all that out because you follow the principle. And that's definitely a word that we use on the kingdom point of view. And they're all principles. They're all behavior traits. And that's something that we constantly trying to show to our listeners and our viewers and people in the audience, just as well as our people on the call, that we want to demonstrate and get people to understand that it's actually psychological, it's mental. Everything starts in the mind. I know that there are some forms of study out here that want to teach people. I've ran into them at different conferences and sat down with them with all their types of degrees. And by the time I left, by the time we sat down and I was leaving, they were still writing on pencil and paper when I got through talking. Because I will say this, emotions is not your first response. There is a thought before the emotions. So whoever keep practicing that out there, telling people that emotions are first, it's not. God spoke. He used his thought. It was a word. It was his thought process. He definitely didn't use his emotion first. So the Creator done it exactly in the same order that things happen. It's just that we don't want to be self-accountable sometimes for our decisions. And I know that we've been covering a lot of bases here, Ms. Peel, because Ms. Simmons, just as well, that we're going to have to deal with a part 1, part 2, and part 1,000 when it comes to mental health out here. And I'm glad that you came on to assist us today in that area, because there's so many areas that we can go in, and we're going to utilize a lot of that information from the young lady speaking on the resources. Like you said, you talked about your church just as well, and I know mine right here in Macon, Georgia, Union Baptist just as well has those type of things just as well. And there are some, and unfortunately there are a lot that are not. But we do have to all come together. That is the plan. That's why God called it the body of Christ. And once that understanding is understood, then they'll know that the community is all coming together, trying to make change. And that's the only way it's going to change. And another statement you made, and to tie it all into the word, showing that you are absolutely correct. That's why I say iron sharpen iron, so one man sharpens another. And that's what we have to do as brothers and sisters, continue to sharpen each other so that we can all gain strength. But what happens a lot of time, we end up casting pearls before swine. We end up wasting time, like I said earlier, bad company corrupts good behavior. So we have to understand that on this path of recovery, that this is the things that we're gonna have to do. So when we do these things and do it correctly and stay in order, I do believe that they will change. And like I say, young lady, this has been a good session right here on part one, I'm gonna call it, on this form of mental health. And we covered a lot of bases, Ms. Simmons. And definitely I know that we've helped someone right here on the Kingdom Point of View. But until next time, young lady, we'll see you again. And once again, for all the callers, y'all check in on the email. Miss Lupia Simmons' information gonna be up there as well. She gave us a lot of information we'll have up there so that we can check in, especially when it comes to the order on trying to handle things, as we heard today in the questions financially, dealing with the family. And she did break down a lot of steps that that even I paid attention to and learned today, but I started running them in my head, tying them into the Kingdom Point of View on how God is, and I knew you lined up, young lady. That's why I was listening and smiling. Because if you got it already designed in mental health and you're working in the natural world, God is working with you in great favor. So once again, on the Kingdom Point of View, we appreciate you. We'll see you next time. And for all the callers and the viewers and everyone that's paying attention virtually just as well, until next time, we'll see you on the Kingdom Point of View.